Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. With the White House trying to make peace in Ukraine while doing virtually nothing on Gaza, what does Donald Trump's foreign policy really stand for? Let's get to the bottom line. What the America First president has done in U.S. relations with the world is nothing short of a revolution. Soft power? Who needs it? International law and order? Who cares? Allies? Well, they're a burden. Annexing independent countries like Canada, Greenland, or Panama? Why not? The world, according to President Donald Trump, has only two categories, winners or losers, and he doesn't want to be associated with losers. He does crave the image of global peacemaker and boasts that he's averaged one peace deal per month since coming to office. He likes one-and-done deals like Iran, where he bombs the country one day and signs a ceasefire the next. As for ending the Israeli massacres in Gaza, he has close to zero interest. Now he's trying to resolve the Russia-Ukraine war. But the questions remain. How much of U.S. policy is based on presidential impulses that zigzag from day to day? How much is a distraction from other stuff, like the Epstein files? And how should the world make sense of a U.S. foreign policy in the Trump era? Today we're talking with Jacob Heilbrunn, editor of the politics and foreign policy website, The National Interest, and he's author most recently of America Last, the right's century-long romance with foreign dictators. Jacob, thank you so much for joining us today. We are speaking right now before a major summit between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump to take place in Alaska. It's unknown whether Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, will show up or not for this or even be invited. But we're looking at a major moment of major leaders meeting to address the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Where does this fit within Donald Trump's foreign policy and how we should understand this moment?
Donald Trump is a product of the 1970s in foreign policy, when you had big superpower summits between Brezhnev and Nixon and between Jimmy Carter and Brezhnev. And he wants to return to that order, as does Russia, which is two big superpowers, each recognizing each other's legitimate interests and coming to a foreign policy conclusion over the heads of the small powers, namely those in Central and Eastern Europe. Today, it is Ukraine that is on the chopping block.
And so by doing that, you said something very important, doing this over the heads of smaller powers. This means over the heads of Volodymyr Zelensky, whose nation was invaded, over the heads of NATO allies who are not necessarily consulted or part of this equation, over the heads of a lot of others. And I guess my question to you is, is that a fruitful direction? Is America that kind of power? Is Russia powerful enough to deserve that kind of summit?
So I think we are, in fact, that kind of power and have been that kind of power, even though we don't like to say it openly. We have conducted a very realist-oriented foreign policy. Yalta in 1945, for example, which settled the fate of Eastern Europe, conducted between Franklin Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin. Today, however, Russia is a small power. It is not a superpower. So Trump is making unilateral concessions to Putin by meeting him in, of all places, Alaska, which the Russian government originally sold to the United States in the 19th century.
What are your expectations of the summit?
Those who say there's no deal possible are completely wrong. We are dealing with President Trump, a man who lives for the art of the deal. His dream is to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Trump himself is advocating for himself as a man of peace he wants to surpass Barack Obama. I mean, that's what's going on here. So he's willing to do, he doesn't care about the fate of Ukraine. His interest is to reach the appearance of a peace deal rather than necessarily the substance, something that he can depict as a victory. He will try and reach an agreement with Putin, impose it upon Ukraine, and if Ukraine refuses, then he will say he'll wash his hands of it and say that Ukraine is the obstacle to peace, not Russia.
We often hear him talking about ending the killing, wanting to stop the killing and the murders. It's something you hear from most of his foreign policy and national security staff as they describe what's driving him in all of this. And I have to ask you all this before I sort of raise, the horrible state of Gaza today, in which you see, millions of people being starved at the moment. So what is real and authentic in Donald Trump's impulses and what is not?
Well, it's always difficult to know what's real. I mean, the guy is a master brand salesman, and he is selling the brand of peace. I think he is risk averse, and he has not entered a major war in his first presidency, nor in his second term as president. And I think that again comes out of the 70s, the idea that you reach agreements with the Soviet Union, that there's always the danger of a war lurching into a nuclear war. So I think that is a genuine impulse on Trump's part. However, you brought up the Gaza Strip. There, I think he floated the notion of turning it into a Riviera. I don't think he's averse to, his local guy, Netanyahu, going in there and cleaning the place out in Trump's perspective, settling the problem, much as he's bringing troops into D.C. right now as a show of force.
Look, you said he hasn't entered any major war. He did do something which surprised me and many other analysts, which was he overtly committed American bombers to going in and bombing a significant portion of Iran's nuclear capacity, nuclear energy capacity, its development capacity and centrifuges, in something that many other presidents had refused to do because they were worried of what it could grow into, what it might escalate into. He did that. He took that action on behalf of Israel, and then he snapped his fingers and said, "We're done. We obliterated their system. Israeli fighters pull back." And we've never seen a president act like that.
No, but I think it was a limited strike. I think they clearly were talking or back channeling to the Iranian regime. I think it was an audacious move. It paid off, and you have to give him props for doing it. But did he think it would trigger a major war? No, I don't think he did, and that's why he pulled the Israelis back after he conducted that nuclear strike.
Help me understand a little bit more Trump's approach to Israel and the Gaza crisis in the sense that he's still giving carte blanche to Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel regarding Gaza. It largely seems to be supporting some form of displacement strategy and is very erratic when it comes to America taking over Gaza, not taking over Gaza, or giving Netanyahu a wink and nod that he can take over all of Gaza. I'm just interested in, when it comes to great power identity in this moment, how do you see that conflict?
Well, that would fit in with Trump's great power ethos, which is that the power that has the ability can create its own facts, its own context. And Israel is clearly intent on depopulating the Gaza Strip and the West Bank as well. Now, that will turn it into a pariah nation in Europe, but if it has Trump's backing, maybe it can get away with it.
We're barely 6 months in to the presidency of Donald Trump. And I mean, it is exhausting to list all of the things that have happened, both, I would say, positive and my assessment, consequentially, potentially negative. He's definitely gut punched inertia. I used to tell people the biggest problem facing America as a nation, as a state, is inertia, that now that is over, that everything is having to be rethought. But I'm interested in the elements in politics of distraction as I see them, because we just a couple of weeks ago, the director of national intelligence calling out Barack Obama, saying they were potentially going to take action looking into treasonous acts of how they had treated and looked at Russia's meddling in the 2016 elections. You had other elements that people said, oh, that was designed to sort of be a distraction from the debate over the so-called Epstein files, a child predator, essentially, who trafficked in young women and had a lot of friendships with a lot of powerful people, including Donald Trump. Just want to put that on the table. That various other things are done to wag the dog or to create distraction or to flood the zone. You know all the language of this. How much, and that gets us into foreign policy, because it raises the question of whether America's actions or inactions, which result in either people being saved or killed, they impact relationships one way or another. How much of that is wag the dog, flood the zone, distraction from domestic problems that Trump is having?
A good chunk of it is. I mean, he's constantly in motion. That's the Trump presidency. That's the contrast to the Democratic presidents who were much more passive than Trump has been. And I never understood why Biden or or even Obama were so diffident about exercising the latent powers of the presidency. Trump is not. And that is why he is meeting Vladimir Putin in Alaska to try and make a unilateral deal. There's always something in foreign policy. He can rattle the chain of NATO. He can demand more funding for NATO over there. There's always something he can do to provoke a controversy, and he has a brilliant nose for it. He's doing the same thing in Great Britain right now, where they're demanding free speech rights for far-right activists, some of whom are jailed in the United Kingdom. So there's a constant trolling going on as well from the Trump administration.
India is clearly a rising power that's going to be a major global stakeholder, huge population coming online, while China's population is shrinking, more and more wealth and capacity to deploy in the world. And America has wanted India on its side as a way to contend with China. But then Donald Trump comes out and says, oh, we're going to put big sanctions on you, 50% sanctions because you're buying oil from Russia. Even though China and many other nations are buying oil from Russia, doesn't matter. We're going to do that to India. And I'm just interested in, I don't know where that relationship is going to end up, but certainly Prime Minister Modi is furious. So I'm just wondering, is there an account? I mean, you're very experienced in this. Does Donald Trump get away with all of this eventually because of who he is and how he's behaving, and other nations have to acquiesce, or will there be an accounting for it?
I think there will. I could be totally wrong, but it seems to me that the tariff policy is almost like stepping on a landmine to cure a headache, and that the sweeping rises in prices that loom before us for consumer goods in the grocery store that are already starting to impact us, or at Walmart, will have a very negative effect on Trump's political fortunes. Now, a lot of these things that he does with India, when he talks about cutting off or raising tariffs because of the gas prices, the sale of oil from Russia, is really a pretext, because he wants to try and impose his will upon these countries. And is he really upset that Russia is selling oil to India? I don't think so. He wants to impose higher tariffs on them as a bargaining tactic. The question is, will it work? Already, Switzerland and Spain are talking about ending their purchases of F-35s in the United States.
One of the big divides in U.S. foreign policy are those who've said our national security direction, the vector of our policy, should be really rather tightly wrapped around those core national interests. And then to the degree you can do other good things in the world, fine, but don't undermine your vital national interests. And I think that's a divide, because there are a lot of places in the world that think that we live as a nation to exist and do great things beyond those. And so there's a tension. It's been there for a long time. I am interested in how you grade Donald Trump specifically around a tighter wraparound of national interest versus some of the recent presidents.
Well, there's no question that Trump has taken a much sterner view and a more compact view of what constitutes American national interest. And it is centered around what he believes will restore the American economy and thus American greatness, bringing us back to the position that we exercised in the 1950s and 1960s of true global dominance, not just militarily, but economically. And that dominance, as you know, has been shriveling. We don't even have a defense industrial base in this country anymore that is viable. And the Ukraine war has shown that. And that's why you have people like Elbridge Colby in the Defense Department who are focused on trying to restore that industrial base and saying that no, America cannot do everything abroad.
But why isn't there more applause for that agenda that you just laid out?
I think the difficulty with Donald Trump is that he has been openly antagonistic and belittling to our allies while fawning over a series of dictators abroad, as we talked about in the book that you talked about that I wrote. Trump would be better off to work in tandem with our allies in Asia to contain China, by provoking Japan, which feels antagonized and is angry at Trump, South Korea. And then you look at NATO. Germany does not trust the United States anymore. Merz is essentially saying that Europe is going to have to go it alone. I don't think that's a strategy that amplifies American power. In fact, it diminishes it.
So Donald Trump basically frames allies as burdens who've taken advantage of American power. Now, most leaders have said these allies have helped convey American power and reflect American power and helped America achieve things in the world it wanted to do. But Donald Trump has an inverted view of that looks at these allies as burdens, as things that are not necessary or helpful to U.S. foreign policy and the U.S. economic interests. How do you see it?
I don't see it the same way. The reason he sees it that way is because he thinks that democracies are inherently weak and fragmented and unable to reach decisions. That's why, again, he wants to meet Putin in Alaska and just cut a deal with a strong man like himself. Now,
but to that point, he wants fast deals. I mean, it's another element that I find so interesting because he was going to solve the Russia-Ukraine conflict in one day. Then when he came in on the first day, he says, well, maybe it's going to take 6 months. I talked to General Keith Kellogg, who was his negotiator then. Now he's got a whole variety of players assigned with negotiating, but it looks like his real estate developer pal, Steve Witkoff, is the key negotiator here. But it's taking a lot longer. One of the interesting things about Donald Trump, and I just want to get your sense, is his impatience, that he wants something fast.
That's right. But then you saw that Witkoff misinterpreted what Putin's message was. He thought that Putin was offering him a huge concession of pulling out of some of the Donbass. False. The Trump negotiating strategy is to wing it. And the Russians are extremely meticulous and prepared when they walk into these meetings. Their aim is to manipulate Donald Trump. So I don't think that this impulse just to rush into a deal and get it over quickly is really a viable one. It sets us up, in fact, for Russia having a second round in a year or so when it rebuilds its military and attacks Ukraine again. What's Trump going to do then?
Is there a point where Donald Trump begins to become a kinetic actor in foreign policy, more prone because his ego is being harmed or hurt or clearly is looking subordinate to another big ego in the world?
Could happen. I think Trump is not really constituted to deal with failure. He doesn't believe that it can exist when he encounters something like that. That's why I think we are headed for some kind of fiasco, either in domestic or foreign policy or both.
Is soft power dead today? Is American soft power? Because I see a lot of Japanese soft power and Chinese soft power, but is American soft power dead?
American soft power for the moment is on artificial life support. Now, China obviously takes in a very different view and is building up its capacity and moving into those areas in Africa, for example, where we've left.
Trump has also threatened Canada with 35% tariffs. So negotiating tariffs not related to U.S. industry, not related to some form of industrial policy. 35% tariffs if Canada recognizes Palestine, which the French, the British, and now the Australians have all committed to do. I'm interested in the erratic nature of being able of saying I'm going to, as President of the United States, put tariffs on you that are insurmountable because of your actions on Palestine. What is that about?
Again, I think it is more of a pretext. I think Trump wants to impose as high tariffs as possible. Now, I am told that there are also people in the Canadian government that sincerely believe that at some point Trump may indeed try to invade some of the Canadian territories and seize them. That would be another distraction. I mean, you talked about distractions before. We have Greenland, we have Canada. Trump always...
I was going to ask you, and Panama.
When things get difficult for Trump, he doesn't back down. He doubles down.
Well, you've mentioned Greenland. I've mentioned Panama. You've talked about Canada and turning it into a 51st state. Those seem to have subsided to some degree.
For now.
So you think there's a good chance they could be back?
Absolutely. When he needs, as you were saying earlier, when he needs a distraction or if he is faltering in the polls and the economy is crashing in this country, I would honestly not put anything past him.
So let's get back to the period of the world before Trump came in. You know, neither Biden nor Barack Obama came in and rewired the global social contract, found a place for India and Brazil in the permanent five, in the United Nations. They left institutions mostly as they were. The international order seemed creaking and sagging and unable to kind of deal with the power and the way it was distributed in the world. Hasn't Donald Trump, in a way, done a lot of good things by ripping that illusion off that the world was working well and now creating a world that now has to go out and find some new patterns?
He may, but my worry is that, ironically, he's made it better for Europe than he's made it for the United States, that he's forced the Europeans to invest in NATO and to strengthen the European Union. But does all of this benefit the United States, or are we actually inadvertently creating stronger adversaries and competitors abroad? I think it's more going to be the United States alone. We won't have as many allies, and we won't be as strong as we were in the past. That, in fact, he is squeezing the remnants of what's left in the American empire. And we're living off that. It's short term, but where does that leave us in the long term?
Let me ask you about the state of the American brand. The American brand during the Cold War with the Soviet Union used to be presented as the beacon on the hill, the alternative. This is where freedom flourished. People had rights of all kinds. What does America stand for as you see it, and what's the state of the American brand today?
The American brand is tattered, and it is viewed as a hostile power in Canada and other countries. I was just in Vermont. There are no Canadian tourists. Tourism has shriveled. In the 1950s, we sent Louis Armstrong abroad under the U.S. Information Agency. We were a popular power in many countries. I think Trump has deliberately taken an axe to that, and he has returned to a form of naked great power politics. We have always practiced some form of great power politics, but we have also camouflaged, if you will, or tried to sell a more optimistic vision. That is now gone. What you see is a raw, ugly face.
Jacob Halbrun, editor of the National Interest, thank you so much for joining us today. That was great.
Thank you, Steve.
So what's the bottom line? Today, the bottom line is not about the ins and outs of U.S. policy in the world, but its real effects on people's lives. Anas al-Sharif was our colleague and prominent correspondent covering Israel's war and the dynamics of starvation in Gaza. Israeli military forces had threatened him to stop reporting what he was reporting, what he was seeing with his own eyes. They didn't warn him because he was the head of a Hamas cell, which is nonsense. They wanted him to stop showing the reality of a nation being starved, which is just one building block of a genocide. The world depended on Anas and his colleagues to tell you what's going on. Mohammed Kareke, Ibrahim Zaher, Mohammed Nofel, Momen Aliwa, and Mohammed Al-Khali, all targeted by Israel and killed in a tent set aside for the media next to a hospital. These are war crimes. Those pulling the trigger know it. This show is dedicated to their memories and to the commitment to not allow the mass killing of a people to go without attention and without the kind of journalism that leads to real accountability. And that's the bottom line.